Welcome, Lauren.
Thanks so much, Rod. I have to say, I felt exactly the same way about that conversation. It was so nice to meet a kindred spirit. And, you know, I met several kindred spirits during that interview. It was just part of what made me drawn to this position and this place from the very beginning.
Right, wonderful. Well, let's start with Iowa and coming to the Stanley Museum of Art. For starters, how did you get here? Can you talk about any connections you had with Iowa or the university that maybe drew you here?
Yeah, you know, interestingly, Ulford Wilkie, who was the first director of the University of Iowa Museum of Art, as it was then called, you know, who came here to really begin the museum project in 1969. You know, he was my parents' professor at the University of Louisville right after the Second World War. You know, he's a German immigrant, an artist. He, you know, he had a career in Europe and then came to the United States, as many European artists did in the years around the Second World War, and landed in Louisville, Kentucky. And my parents adored him. You know, they were both visual artists. My dad was a sculptor, my mother a painter. And, you know, he was often spoken of in my house. There was a painting by him hanging in my bedroom as a kid. Wow. It's right around the corner in my house right now. You know, so it just seemed like kismet when this position opened up. I was working in Maine. I wanted to come back to the Midwest. I was ready to step up to a director's position. And, you know, I had a good feeling about this, this job even before I came for my interview. And certainly when I arrived here and met the people at this university and in this community, that really cinched it for me.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's really interesting. We here in Iowa tend to believe that we're something different or unique. Anything that you saw that made Iowa or makes Iowa unique from other places either you've worked or lived?
Well, I mean, there are things that I saw, certainly. I mean, I was here before I came for my interview back in 2018. I had come here in the early 2000s for a conference. And it was the only place I'd ever been where I saw people walking down the street and reading simultaneously. You know, I just thought, this is a community that loves the arts. And I heard people talking about art. You know, I saw the old museum where my office is right now, you know, when it was still installed with art. And, you know, I just thought, what a special place. And so, you know, I think a lot of people have that same feeling when they come here. But then, of course, I also knew about the University of Iowa by reputation. I mean, this was the first place in the world where this idea of teaching directly from works of visual art, teaching a range of subjects and making those connections, that started right here at the University of Iowa a century ago, the Iowa idea, right? So when you're spurred by the Mellon Foundation, other universities began exploring using art collections in this way back in the 1990s. They were just catching up to us. Right. So, you know, that's something that I knew about the University of Iowa before I came here.
Yeah, it's something that we're so proud of. There are a lot of universities out there, and a lot of universities that have the same colleges or some of the same colleges we do, but you point out it's the arts maybe that makes the University of Iowa special and something unique to others. And that is something that I'm glad you see that pride, because it's something that we have all had. What have you liked in the time that you've had in the 2 years that feels like 2 weeks or 2 decades? What have you liked most about Iowa? What, or anything surprised you about being here in this state, in this town?
Yeah, the inland hurricane surprised me. You know, that
surprised us all.
Right, but I have to say, I have loved the people here. That's been the high point of my 2 years. Like this community, you know, it's open, and the people are open and welcoming. They're open to new neighbors, but they're also open to new ideas, and it's something I really love about the Midwest. Yeah. You know, our landscapes are open, but so are our minds, and I think that it makes everything I do so much easier, but also it energizes me. You know, you can talk about ideas in a group, in a room full of Iowans, and you can see them get excited and get on board and have ideas of their own that they bring to the table, and they're ready to do new things. I love that about this place.
Great, and new things you're going to do as director, as our new museum is finished. So let's talk a bit about your career and about being a director of a museum. It's such an interesting field. You know, people portray that in movies. And so what led you to a career both in the arts, but also toward being a director of a museum?
That's a great question. I mean, I think it would have been weird in a way if I didn't work in the arts, because both parents were artists. I grew up watching them make things and making things myself, and I understood very early on that art making and a love of art is as inherent to us as people as language is. It's just part of who we are as human beings. And so, it never occurred to me to work apart from that. But I did lots of things. I was an art librarian for a while. I have an MLS, and then went back, to graduate school, got my PhD in art history, had this wonderful postdoc experience at the Nelson-Atkins Museum where I loved that work. It was just research, but I spent every day working in a cubicle in the attic. And I was so hungry to be with people that I wound up teaching at night at UMKC, the local branch of the University of Missouri. Went to Colby College because the position there would allow me to combine teaching and curatorial work, and loved that. But the longer I was there, the more I moved into a supervisory role. I was just a one-person department when I arrived in 2007, and then I had the opportunity to work with this very visionary director, Sharon Corwin, who has now moved on from Colby to lead the Terra Foundation. And, she just taught me so much. And I think, she taught me what it meant to be a leader. And what it means is, clearing the path for the people that you work with to do what they do really well. And so I found as I built this department under me and, kept adding staff to the education department there, that became just a tremendous source of joy for me to watch, to hire really smart people who were good at what they did and then watch them take off and do things that I never would have thought of doing. And so, I was there for 10 years, and I probably would have left a little bit earlier to become a director, but my son was in high school. So I waited until he graduated, and then, then I was off.
Wonderful. Yeah, and how fitting. You studied library science and were a librarian, and your next door neighbor is our Maine library, and John Colshaw and his great staff. So as you know, as John knows, the partnerships have already begun. And that'll be an exciting marriage of two really important core programs for the University of Iowa.
Absolutely. And, museums are libraries. We are a library of global visual culture.
Right.
So it's a big part of who we are. And for those of you who don't know, the main library at the University of Iowa has a tremendous art collection.
And gallery.
Yeah. We're going to be exchanging objects and ideas all the time.
Right. And it was part of our thinking in the siting of the building because of the marriage between the two. So in your career, maybe you can tell us a bit about what you've learned about humanity, about history, about art from the job you've had, and now you can give us secrets. Any lessons for life you can give us from what you've learned in being in such a visual and expressive career?
That's a great question too. I think that one of my big revelations that I've had in the last 10 years is that when you look deeply, when you really explore a work of art, and when you do that in conversation with other people, it teaches a lot of things. It teaches empathy. And there have been some wonderful studies that have been done recently on this, on the role of museums and art museums in particular in increasing empathy across cultures, helping us better understand people in different places, in different situations. And it's measurable, and I have to say, I never did a study, but I could certainly see it working with college students at Colby. And we need empathy right now, we really do. And so I think because art museums have always given me a tremendous amount of hope for humanity. And they are a place where I renew myself, where I think a lot of people, find comfort. And that's one thing that art can do. But art can also rouse people to a cause and inspire them to make change. And, art can remind us that we're human. And that's, I think that art also teaches us to think critically. and how creativity works. And it changes the way that we see the world. And I can't think of a better definition of education than that, which is why working at an art museum that's on a college campus has always been my goal.
Wonderful. Yeah, and a very timely answer. That hope and that empathy needed so much today. Looking forward, and as you look for the visions for the Stanley Museum of Art and the partnerships you'll have not only on our campus, but with other museums throughout the nation and the world, as you look ahead and you look at the challenges in higher education, the disinvestment at the state levels in almost every state in the nation, and the constant fiscal challenges we have wherein K through 12, often the arts are ones we worry about surviving some of the necessary either cuts or efficiency efforts. What role do you think art is going to play in this next era of higher education for us?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So, students now are facing a new set of challenges. They are facing a world where they're going to have to move between jobs. They're going to have to continue learning new skills and adapting to really rapid cultural and technological change. And so higher education has to shift and change to adapt to that set of needs. Universities have to become more flexible. They have to be technologically enabled, but they also have to teach skills that technology alone can't teach. And that gets back to what I was speaking of earlier, being able to bravely step into new paradigms, to think critically, to be able to weigh options and make the right choices, to be able to be creative. These are things that art has always taught. And so I think that art museums on college and university campuses in particular can really play a role in building this 21st century skill set and preparing university students for the world that they're going to live and succeed in.
Great answer. Well, it's a visual thing we're talking about. Let's turn to the slides. Okay. So Tony and his team are going to show us some slides, show those of you who have joined us some slides, and we're going to have Lauren, you talk about them. As folks know, we survived a historic flood in 2008 that, amongst many challenges for our campus, pushed us out of our original Museum of Art building, the Max Abramovitz building from 1969, your current and temporary office home. And ever since then, we have been battling to bring our art back to campus. And we've worked with Rod Cruzy and the great and talented team at BNIM to put together the museum that we're so excited about, that is in construction next door to the main library. And Lauren, if you can walk us through a few of these images so people can enjoy what we have moving forward, what we have to look forward to, and you can describe some of this. Our first, I think, Tony, our first image will be the front entrance and Gibson Square entrance.
Yeah, and as that's coming up, I'll just let people know, I've heard from a few people who are a little bit anxious about the future of Gibson Square Park. Gibson Square Park is very much alive and well and will continue to be. There's a lot of construction equipment there right now. Some trees have been moved, but they've just been moved. They're coming back, and the museum itself is built on the footprint of the parking lot that was there. So we are taking no green space, and we have this.
And I'll mention that the park is named Gibson Square after Dick Gibson, who was a 40-year facilities and planning director for the university, and recently, or in these last few years past, and a great remembrance of his impact on the campus. And I would argue that it's been a relatively underutilized green space on our campus, and it is, as you will see, about to change because it becomes the front doorstep to our new Stanley Museum of Art.
That's absolutely right. It's going to be our front yard. And, I think we have this wonderful, generous entrance plaza that you can see, the Willis Plaza, leading into the building with steps. There's also a ramp there. It's a fully accessible building. And that is going to be a gathering space and a performance space, as well as an entry point to the museum. And I can envision musical performances, theatrical performances taking place on that terrace, with people sitting on blankets in the park in the summer.
Maybe the Willises will dance for us there.
Yeah, they're great dancers. Actually, they would be up for that. So, you know, this is going to be a space that I hope is in constant use. It's also, our wonderful outdoor sculpture collection is coming back. We have works in conservation right now that will be installed in and around the museum. But, you know, leaving lots of space for people to gather, for people to, I hope there are yoga classes out here. And, you know, it's also a place where people can just hang out and talk and read. And that there's a flow of community, you know, from the park and into the museum. You know, Rod, that really good design for public spaces enables the social function of those spaces. And you know, my hat is off to the team at BNIM, not only Rod Cruzy, but Levi Robb, Carrie Nagel, and Tom Feldman, who have all thought through this so well, you know, making the museum a really welcoming space with a threshold that is not intimidating, that's really easy to cross, that welcomes you in. I love the glass across the front of the first story here. So, you know, people on the inside of that lobby space can look out at the park. People on the outside can see what's happening in the museum. You know, we belong to the community and the campus. And that transparency, I think, is a metaphor for how we want to function. You know, we want to function in partnership with the people in this community.
It's a daytime rendering, but as one can imagine, vibrant campus after dark as well, that first floor becomes such a welcoming beacon for people to enter and illuminate Gibson Square. And you'll also notice that if people are wondering, the material above the first floor, which needed to be protected from daylight because the second floor is the gallery, is a brick, but it's an interesting black brick with high iron content in it, that as we did studies and as the architects from BNIM did studies of this and selected it, it really gives its own aura with reflections off of both from this angle, the morning sunrises to the sunsets on the west side of the building. The brick itself will sort of glow and illuminate and play with the light, which we really look forward to.
And I saw it the other day. I was in the building with a small group of people and got a chance to walk around to the west side of the building that faces the river
right.
as the sun was getting lower in the sky, and it really works. You know,
yep.
it just made my week to see that.
Wonderful.
It's beautiful brick, and there are different treatments on the different stories.
That's right.
The texture on that second story will catch the snow also. So that whole second story will lighten in tone when the first snow falls. You can see in this rendering one of the two terraces that the building will have. The Somerville Terrace will face Burlington, and then this terrace that you can see is the Horan McBride Terrace, and that will face the Lindquist Center across the street. And these are going to be, I think they're going to be incredibly popular spaces. You can walk out on these on a nice day, you know, and enjoy the air and the sunshine and still be in proximity to wonderful works of art. They're going to be great social spaces when we have openings and events in the building. And of course, this is the building will be a wonderful gathering space as well as a show place and an educational place. So I love that this rendering shows all the students and other visitors kind of hanging out on that Willis Plaza, which is quite wide and generous. And you get a sense here of the flow into the building and how easy it'll be to move from the exterior to the interior of the space. Good. And also there's the main library, right?
Yeah,
so
there it is in the background, yeah.
So this is the steel frame of the building. And again, you know, it's moving, things are moving so fast that we just put these slides together a couple of weeks ago, and already, you know, much of what you're seeing here has been enclosed. The brick's not on the front of the building yet, but that's happening. So the goal is to have the entire building enclosed, not with brick, but enclosed by mid-November when the really cold weather hits. So, you know, it's really magnificent. It's a 3-story building, but because the gallery floors will be more than 13 foot high, you know, between the floor and the ceiling, those stories are really tall. So each one of these stories is almost like 2 stories of another building. There's a group that went up on the roof the other day. I didn't climb up on the roof, I have to say. I was a little bit nervous about doing it, but it made people dizzy. It's pretty high up there. It gives you a sense of the scale, I think, to see this a shot of the construction.
All right, the next shot, our stairs.
So, this is the public staircase inside the lobby, and it's a very beautiful steel staircase. I particularly love this almost fabric-like folded steel that's perforated that winds up, from the lobby to the third story on the staircase, which will be enclosed with glass, but visible from the lobby. It's perforated in a way that lightens the steel so that it's not too heavy, but also just, again, adds to this transparency. And, you can see right through, it does look like woven fabric. It's very graceful. So I love this shot. And then I think you're seeing the wellness center there through the, what's an open
south.
Yeah.
Right.
But that will be a glass wall. So you'll still have a sense of openness when the building is complete.
Good.
So we can move on. I think the next slide, this is up on the third story. And again, this has all been enclosed now, but this is where the education suite will be. So, this is just as important as our gallery floor, which is the second story. The third story is where our storage is. So, the art will be stored high up. And I should talk a little bit about flood prevention and control in this building, because I know that's been a point of anxiety, very understandably, for a lot of people. First of all, I will say that I have seen the footprint of this building at the height of the 2008 flood, and it was high and dry. But should water ever reach the edges of where the building is now, there will be a parking garage. So even though the building is being constructed on the footprint of that parking lot that was adjacent to the main library, every single one of those parking spaces will come back in an open air, partially submerged parking garage beneath the building. And so water would really have to fill that, 15-foot high space in order to even reach the first floor. And there's no real damage that it can do down there as long as people have moved their cars. The mechanicals are all on the first floor. So the first floor, I'm at the third floor and I'm talking about the first floor, but the first floor has the loading dock and the freight elevator, but the art will be stored up here on the third floor. And we have both an area for works on paper and an area for the rest of the collection. Our existing collection can really all be stored here in the building, but we do have ancillary storage space for growth, which is, I think, really important. So, what I think the corner that we're looking at right now is, I'm trying to orient myself. I think this is where the art storage is going to be, but the opposite corner will be an education suite that will include 2 classroom spaces, a seminar room that could accommodate a third group of students. And these are spaces where we can have works on view for varying lengths of time. We can rotate works very easily in and out of those spaces so that students can study directly from works of art. And this is where this idea of the museum as a laboratory comes in. We're not only a library of global visual culture, but we're a laboratory space where students, faculty, and members of the general public, can go to our online catalog, which is part of the Iowa Digital Library, find works of art that interest them, request to see those works. They can be rotated out into these study spaces, and people can really study them closely. We belong to the state of Iowa, so really the art is here for anyone who wants to see it. So, and this is it's wonderful also to see the building in frame like this, because you get views that you won't have when the building is complete. I keep telling people when I take small groups of people up into the building, enjoy the view, because you'll never see this view again. Once the walls are built, you will never be able to see exactly the same sweep of Iowa.
You won't have that daylight anymore, nor do we want it anymore.
Right. Architects love bringing light into a building, and museum curators want to control it. Right. So great segue to the next slide, which is on the left, you get a great shot of the stairwell, but on the right, this is the light well that's built directly into the center of the building. And this will be open to the sky, but enclosed with glass. So it will bring light right down, through the core of the building. We will install sculpture in this space, although not the Lindquist Center's amazing Louise Nevelson. We're not going to like steal that in the middle of the night, I promise all of you who work and take classes over in the College of Education. But you know, we have some plans already to install a work by an early 20th century sculptor whose work is currently on view in the Iowa Memorial Union, and that work is a fountain. So I made very few changes to the architect's designs when I arrived in 2018 because they were so elegant that, you know, I could hardly think of a better designed museum for a campus art museum. But I did two things. I made sure there were water pipes in the walls of the lobby so that we could have a fountain in the light well, and we could also have a coffee cart in the lobby, because I want it to be a social space for students and for visitors. And I want to be able to have fountains in this light well space. And then the other one of the other changes that I made was to have lots of plugs in the lobby so that students could plug their laptops in. You know?
Yeah, always important. And I think people should recognize one of the things as they visit this building when it's open, one of the things that the BNIM team aimed at was this center courtyard of light where the stair is, to be a unifying factor. Many museums you go to or visit, you sort of get lost in the museum. And one of the intents of the design and of the placement of that lit stairwell was to isolate the light, as you point out, in one place so that we don't have it throughout. But then also, wherever you are in the museum, you're just a glance away from knowing that that light well is taking you to the other floors or to the center of the building, so that there's always a place to center your attention and know where you are as you enjoy the works of art in the Stanley Museum of Art.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, Rod Cruzy, the lead architect on this project, of course, we have a model of the museum building that we would take around and show people before we had a building that was standing. And he would do this really neat thing where he would shine a light down through the light well, and it would illuminate the whole model in the same way that the sunlight pouring down through this light well will illuminate the building. So I really love it.
Wonderful space.
It's great. It makes the building into a lantern in some ways.
Yes. Tony, what do we have?
Oops, let's see. Oh yeah, and this is the architect's rendering of our lobby space, which, you know, it's big. It can accommodate a lot of people who are either, you know, gathering here just to be in a beautiful space while they study or chat. It's also a performance space. So the ceiling will be, it's acoustically designed so that sound will carry beautifully in the space. It's going to be a wonderful space for musical performances. There's a screen that drops down on that far wall that you can see in this rendering, where we can, you know, speakers can present there. So, you know, this can be an auditorium, or we can screen movies in this space. The wall that you see on the left that has our Sam Gilliam painting hanging on it, we'll never show the Sam Gilliam down here because it's too bright. Sunlight, again, it's like, you know, it's not great for the preservation of artworks, but we want to show art. We want this to be a gallery space also. And so what we have decided is that we're going to use that wall as an installation space for rotating works that will be created by artists with a connection to the state of Iowa. So alumni and students and faculty from the School of Art and Art History, artists who work in the state of Iowa or who have worked in the state of Iowa, we're inviting them to create installations that will rotate every 1 year to 1 semester, and can be tied to events and performances and courses at the university.
Not just the lobby.
Not just the lobby, right.
But as you can imagine, the beautiful views back toward the campus and toward the Gibson Square and the Willis Plaza.
Absolutely. I mean, you'll be looking out at the city and at the park when you're in that space. And this is a rendering of our second floor gallery space. Yeah, I made just a couple of tweaks to the original design, mostly with the doorways of the galleries so that they would be a little more staggered as you moved through the spaces. This is going to be a very active floor. You know, there will be visiting school children, there will be University of Iowa courses meeting in these galleries. But I also want this to function as a space where people can come on their lunch hour or, you know, on a weekend when they have time and really recreate themselves in relation to works of art. And so I wanted there to be a flow between galleries, but I also wanted them to be discreet enough that, you know, the school kids having class 3 galleries over would not disrupt you as you have a quiet moment with the Jackson Pollock. And this gallery floor is capacious enough to accommodate all of that. It's also flexible, so some of the walls on this floor are movable walls, and that will allow us to open up the space for very large, you know, exhibitions, and then to make some very small, intimate spaces where, you know, I hope that faculty and students are curating here all the time. I want this. The museum is a wonderful, you know, unit on campus for pre-professional work for students. One of my mentors is David Brenneman at Indiana University, and he's the director of the Eskenazi Museum there. And he has 30 interns working at any given time, and they're working in every department of the museum. They're working in marketing and communications. They're working in curatorial. They're working in education. You know, we are a space where students can get the kind of real world experience that prepares them for a career in museums or in other fields. And so, you know, I think this is a practice space where students can get that kind of experience through curating. And, you know, so we can make smaller spaces that are more manageable for students and then open it up for big exhibitions that we curate, you know, in partnership with museums around the country and the world. So.
Great. Next up.
Oh, go ahead, Rod.
Oh, no, Tony took us to the next slide, which was the last slide. What else did you have, Lauren?
I was just going to point out, you know, we have this beautiful white birch floor and these high ceilings. You could see.
Yeah. Yeah, built as Rod and the team exclaimed from the very beginning, a museum built to not highlight itself, but highlight the art. You know, there are examples of museums all over the world where the architects, and as university architect, I get it, but try to make the building the work of art. And I think one of the things I think visitors will come to appreciate is this building does not try to outshine the art, but make the art better and more enjoyable and usable from our standpoint.
That is such a good point, Rod. You know, I have a colleague at another university art museum who confided to me that she has to, like, you know, she has a beautiful building, but it's not that well designed to display art for the reasons that you just cited. And she said, you know, I kind of had to give up on having, you know, actual exhibitions here. Right. I mean, can you imagine like being a museum director and saying, yeah, I have to give up on exhibitions?
But look at the building. And by the way, it is still going to be, as everyone will see, a really beautiful building, elegant building, and one that we're proud to have as an important part of our campus. As we thank you, Lauren, for the description of the building, give people an update on this exciting progress we have at the museum. You showed, and I have the original right behind me, the Jackson Pollock, again, not really the original. That will be displayed, you know, thanks to Chris and Susie DeWolf's generous gift. We'll have the gallery highlighting this wonderful and beautiful painting, and quite a story it has since the days of the flood and its trip to, interesting trip through Des Moines and other places to Los Angeles, to the Getty Museum, where it was restored, not repaired from the flood. It was not damaged from the flood, but it needed, after over 50 years of things being attached to it over the years, the dusts and the shellacs and others, a chance to revitalize itself at the Getty Museum. A remarkable re-entry into the art world there, where it stayed for 3 years and set records for visiting installations at the Getty. They created a book in honor of that restoration, and then it went on a worldwide tour. And it has been on a worldwide tour for some time. And maybe you can give us a little update. I know there are folks like HD and Myrene Hoover who have seen, and others who have seen probably every site that it has landed in, and each one of them different and unique. And maybe you could talk a little bit about where Jackson Pollock's mural is today.
Oh, that's a timely question, because it was just installed 2 weeks ago on the walls of the Guggenheim Museum in New York City. Right. And it was the first installation that our staff couldn't go to because of the situation with the virus. But fortunately, we one of the registrars who had worked on that original installation at the Getty lives and works in New York as a freelance art professional, and so she was able to be our representative at the Getty Museum. And then the painting was installed over Zoom. We had an open laptop, and our collection staff were able to talk to the Guggenheim's collection staff, and it's beautiful the way it's installed. I haven't seen it in person, but the curator there just sent me a little video of the installation, and it's among my favorite installations.
That's great. Wonderful. Well, listen, Lauren, as we continue through, it's 9 minutes after 4. Let's jump to some questions if we can. A couple of them, I'm going to answer the very first one in a pretty straightforward or round figure way. Grant asked how many square feet in the new building, and you're going to correct me, but my rough number is 65,000 gross. What's the exact number? You may have that in your head quicker than I do.
3,000, but I'm not sure that counts the terrace.
Yeah. We've got outdoor space. It's another thing. The museum, as we've described with Gibson Square and the terraces, the museum expands beyond just the square footage of the building. Additionally, part of the beauty of our opening this building or placing this building next to the library is that we're able to take advantage of the next door neighbor's Shambaugh lecture hall, so that we have lecture space that is often then placed in a museum at the expense of gallery space and display space. Additionally, a full food service in the library. We can cater within our building, but it allows for people to enjoy. Gibson Square is a connector between the library and a lot of shared spaces. So a long answer to a pretty simple question on square footage. You'd mentioned the virtual world that you're existing in, we're all existing in, Lauren. Ben asked a question about this pandemic and how we have tried to all deal with it in virtual ways. And can you talk some about the consumption and appreciation, as Ben says, of art? And, we've been doing some virtual events. You continue to do those. And how is that going?
It's going well. On the one hand, I mean, we pivoted very nimbly to online programs. We have a full slate of public programs that are happening this fall that are on our website. I urge you to go take a look and see, everything from, art making workshops that'll be offered online, to a book group, to lots of talks and public, discussions about art. The one thing that we can't replicate virtually is the experience of seeing an actual work in real space. And that, I think, I know I'm very hungry for that. I think we all are. And, by the time the museum opens, this will be in our rearview mirror, and we'll all be.
It's good time. One can argue interesting or maybe good timing. When this museum opens, we're going to be ready to get out and see things together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, good. So maybe you can answer this one for us, Lauren. Manuela asked about the virtual signed wall. And where and how that's playing a part, or where that is within the museum for people to think or visit.
So that's up on our website, and the link is on our website, and it's also on the museum's Instagram and Facebook pages. Yeah. And we invite you to follow that link. You can create a message that will be transferred to a wall that will be an interior wall in the museum. Nobody will be able to see it, but it will be in there. So your message.
You're in there. You're in the history of that building.
Right. It can be embedded in the building, just like a time capsule.
Yeah. Just touch the wall. Yeah. So thank you for that question, Manuela. That's it's an important part of our museum and our experience to building a new museum. One question joined a little late. The architect, Rod Cruzy, and BNIM out of Des Moines. It's actually BNIM, Iowa. The firm is originally out of Kansas City and has numerous offices throughout the country, and has done noted works both in the arts and otherwise, wide range of project types. But Rod Cruzy heads that office and was our lead designer, and as you mentioned earlier, Lauren, a a great team. Rod and his team have partnered with Stephen Hull on both of their buildings on our campus, with Frank Geary on the Iowa Advanced Technology Laboratories building, another building that sort of dances with the sunlight at sunset, like this one will. So we're very proud to have an Iowan at the helm, and an Iowa firm design such an important building on our campus, and a firm that has really stepped up to the plate, not just from an architecture perspective, but from a partnership perspective, and making this happen. It was not a simple task, as Lauren knows, and it's coming together thanks to many, many people, facilities management team working on this project, and so many, but certainly Rod and his team have been wonderful to work with.
They have.
The projected opening, Janice is asking, you want to talk a little bit about the opening of the museum?
Absolutely. So the building itself is on track to be completed in December of 2021. And miraculously, we've lost very little time through this whole very weird spring and summer. But we will not be able to move art into the building right away. It has to climatize. That's just something that you always have to do with every new art museum or space where you're going to be showing works of art. So that will take a few months. And then, of course, we have to move our collection into the building. So we are packing it right now to bring home to Iowa City. And then we have to move the works that will be in the inaugural into the building. And we'll be slowly moving work into the building for a long time during that first year. I don't want to open the museum when the students are not on campus. And so we probably could open in the summer of 22, but I'm shooting for a fall 22 opening date, because it's not an opening until the students can all be here.
Good, we can't wait. There are a couple of questions that sort of relate to the business of operating a museum. And Lauren, we've even had conversations recently about this, and I know it's constantly on your mind and in the efforts of yours and your teams. One question from Kenneth is about resources for conservation and the protection and care of our collections, and the other about staff and hiring staff and operational staff for the museum. We've been a museum without a museum, as the quotes go, and so people have been on your team have been very busy in an unusual way in taking care of the collections on multiple remote locations and temporary locations. But both of those add up to questions about operations. And one of the things I can say before you start to answer is I was so impressed. It's part of the reason I was probably chasing you down the hall during the interview. I was so impressed by your perspectives on operations and the opportunities our museum, our Stanley Museum of Art here at Iowa, have for tapping new and creative partners and resources in operations. Maybe we can talk a bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in terms of resources, well, I'll start with conservation. Mm-hmm. We conserve works in a lot of different ways. We're very lucky to have a conservation lab right here on campus. We have an excellent paper conservation lab that's part of the Maine library and also connected to the Center for the Book. So, we have that resource right here for works on paper. We also work with private conservators and the Midwest Art Conservation Center in Minneapolis. It takes resources to conserve artwork, and it's ongoing. So we're starting to look very carefully at our checklist for the inaugural installation, and we're focusing on those works first. But it's a great learning opportunity for students, the conservation of works of art. And we have been in conversation with faculty at the School of Art and Art History and in the chemistry department in class here about perhaps starting a certificate program for undergraduates in art conservation. We would be one of, I think, only 3 such programs anywhere in the world. There are very few graduate programs for art conservation, and as a result, there are too few art conservators. And so it's really a field that I think it's a field with lots of opportunities in it, and it's really interesting.
And where better than here?
Yeah, where better than here, exactly. So in terms of staff, one of the things that I did in the first couple of years here was take the really excellent staff that I have and put it into a traditional staffing structure, so that we have an education department, curatorial department, a collections department. But I'm also, it's not necessarily fixed. I like non-hierarchical arrangements for staff. I think, I hope that education and curatorial and collections within the museum are all working together very closely all the time, because, the librarians who are our registrars have really interesting things to say about the collection, and I hope their voices are reflected in the way that we present the collection. Educators are the ones who are going to be bringing faculty and student voices into the museum, and those need to sit right next to the curatorial expertise that we present in our installations and exhibitions. And so we operate very much as a tight-knit group. And then I think, Rod, what you were referring to were our partnerships across campus. I mean, one of the things that drew me here, and I should have said at the very beginning, is that this is a Research One university, and that the expertise that's on this campus is beyond belief. And so we have such an opportunity to work hand in hand with, I love where the museum sits. I mean, the College of Education, those can be those faculty and students should be our partners as we reach out to schools and continue to work with schools across the state, to educate not only school children but educators, and they should be part of the way that we present our collection to visiting school groups.
Just up the hill is our College of Engineering, and people may not know or realize you can't be a University of Iowa College of Engineering graduate without taking 3 courses in the fine arts as part of your curriculum, which is unique to the University of Iowa. And I can imagine another draw down the hill, because the best engineers are creative engineers, and the sciences do overlap with the arts, and that's what's special about Iowa.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I've already been in conversations with faculty there about maybe students could be involved in, in civil engineering, could be involved as we reinstall our outdoor sculpture collection.
Yeah, it's exciting. So Tony's pinging me and saying we're at the end of our time. I didn't want to leave. There were a couple of questions that were similar about permanent and rotating galleries. What I can say is this museum will have space for both, and a sort of a rich and intimate setting for our permanent collections, and also opportunity for rotating galleries, the partnerships you have with other universities and others. And then I would be remiss in not taking that final question, or you take just a few words about our renowned African art collection, and does it have a place in the museum? The answer is yes. And you can talk about just a little bit about really what is a world-class, maybe top of the world-class African art collection.
It is, and the Stanley family, we have them to thank for much of our African art collection, which is one of the collections that distinguishes us. This museum, we're a university art museum that has a collection that is the envy of many large urban museums. And that's reflected in our works of modern and contemporary art, and also in our African art collection. And we are, we're having some really wonderful conversations about the best way to present that collection in our inaugural installation. And we're those conversations are not confined just to the staff in the museum. I think it's really important with our African collection in particular to be in conversation with museum professionals and communities, around the world, and, in the African diaspora, as well as, institutions on the continent of Africa. And so we're finding ways to do that in partnership with international programs, right, as we move forward.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you, Lauren. I take my Jackson Pollock mug and toast the arts, toast our museum, and toast you. Thank you for joining us today. It's been wonderful to catch up with you. We do it virtually too often, meaning not face-to-face often enough, but our time is coming, and we're very excited about the progress on the new museum and about you being at our helm. So for all of you who have joined us today, thank you for taking the time out of the afternoon you have to be with us. And we look forward to your continued support of the arts, support of the Stanley collection and Lauren's work, partnerships are what will make our museum difference making for all of us here and across the globe. So we really look forward to it. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, Tony and the team, for bringing us together.